The applause was deafening, but it wasn't for me. It was for Elaine Porter, my boss, standing center stage under golden spotlights that made her designer suit shimmer like liquid silver. She held the glass trophy high above her head, and the audience rose to their feet as one. Behind her, massive screens displayed my sketches, my prototype designs, my months of sleepless work. Every curve, every measurement, every innovation came from my mind and my hands alone. I sat in the crowd, my fingers clenched so tight in my lap that my nails cut half-moons into my palms. I tried to breathe through the humiliation, tried to keep my face neutral as cameras swept across the audience. Then she began her acceptance speech, and I heard my own words coming from her mouth. The exact phrases I'd practiced alone in my apartment, standing in front of my bathroom mirror at 2 a.m. She spoke to them like they'd always belonged to her, like she'd thought of them herself. My name is Maya Thompson, and that night, watching her steal everything I'd worked for, I decided I would never let her get away with it. Not this time. 2 months earlier, I'd been just another junior product designer at Innovate Tech, the person who stayed late after everyone else went home, the one people only noticed when something broke or a deadline loomed. I was 26 years old and desperate to prove myself in an industry that valued experience over ideas. For 3 months, I'd poured everything into creating something revolutionary. A smart ergonomic lamp that adjusted automatically to body posture and ambient light. It used sensors and adaptive technology to reduce eye strain and improve workplace comfort. I called it Luma. The name meant light in several languages, and I'd chosen it carefully, spending an entire evening researching until I found something that felt right. This wasn't just another product. It was the kind of invention that could launch a real career, the breakthrough I'd been working toward since graduating from design school with more debt than prospects. When I first showed Elaine my initial sketches, she'd leaned back in her leather office chair and smiled. "That's brilliant work, Maya. Truly innovative. Let's refine this together." She touched my shoulder in that way managers do when they want you to feel valued but also reminded of the hierarchy. I'd believed her completely. I'd trusted that together meant partnership. The first sign something was wrong came during a routine team meeting 3 weeks into the project. I'd walked into the conference room expecting to present my latest prototype refinements. Instead, I found Elaine already at the front, pulling up a presentation file I'd never seen before. The slides showed my design, my technical specifications, my materials analysis. But at the top of every page, where my name should have been, I saw only her initials. EP Project Lead. When I checked the shared drive later that day, my original files had been moved into a subfolder labeled Archive. The active project folder contained new versions with Elaine listed as primary designer. My contributions were relabeled as development support. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, trying to understand what I was seeing. Had there been a mistake, some technical glitch in the file management system? But when I looked at the modification dates and user logs, everything pointed to deliberate changes. Someone had systematically gone through every document and replaced my name with hers, and that someone had administrative access that only Elaine possessed. My stomach twisted into knots as the reality settled over me like cold water. I confronted her the next morning. I'd practiced what I wanted to say, keeping my voice calm and professional. "Elaine, I noticed some changes to the project files. My name was removed from several documents. Is there something I should know about?" She didn't even look up from her computer. "Oh, that. Maya, you're still learning how corporate projects work. When we present to executives and investors, they want to see established leadership. Your contributions are valuable, but the company needs a recognizable name fronting this kind of innovation." She finally met my eyes, and her smile was thin and cold. "You should be flattered I'm giving your work this kind of platform. Think of it as mentorship. I'm helping you build visibility through association. But my name isn't anywhere," I said quietly. "Exactly. You're young. You have time. Right now, what matters is getting Luma approved and funded. Trust me, this is how successful designers build their careers." She turned back to her screen, dismissing me. The conversation was over. I walked back to my desk feeling like I'd been slapped, but I didn't cry. I'd learned early in my career that showing emotion in the office meant being labeled difficult or overly sensitive. Instead, I opened my personal laptop and started a new folder. If Elaine wanted to play this game, I needed to be smarter. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a ghost in my own project. Elaine scheduled client presentations without telling me. She held meetings about Luma's development and forgot to invite me. When I tried to join discussions, she'd interrupt with, "Oh, Maya can handle the technical documentation while we discuss strategy." I was being systematically erased while simultaneously being expected to do all the actual work. But I didn't fight back openly. Instead, I started documenting everything. Every design iteration got saved with timestamps. Every email about the project got forwarded to my personal account. I photographed my hand-drawn sketches with my phone, making sure the dates were visible. I backed up every CAD file, every technical specification, every materials test result. I created a digital fortress of proof that showed the true origin of every single element of Luma. At night, I worked on the actual prototype in my apartment, refining the code that made the adaptive lighting function work. Elaine had access to my design files, but she didn't understand the underlying technology. She'd focused on stealing the appearance of innovation without comprehending how it actually functioned. That difference would matter. I just had to be patient enough to make it count. The quarterly company meeting arrived like a storm I could see coming, but couldn't avoid. The entire design department gathered in the main conference room, along with executives from across the company. Our CEO, Harrison Brooks, stood at the front looking pleased with himself. "I'd like to recognize some exceptional work happening in our product design division," he announced. "Elaine Porter has been leading an innovative project that represents exactly the kind of forward-thinking work Innovate Tech is known for." Elaine stood, smoothing her navy dress, and walked to the front. She pulled up a presentation, my presentation, barely modified from the version I'd created weeks ago. She described Luma's features, explained the market opportunity, detailed the technical innovations. Every word was mine. Every insight came from my research. When she finished, Harrison clapped enthusiastically. "This is the kind of creative leadership we need. Elaine, I'm putting you in charge of the entire Luma product line going forward. Full creative control." The room applauded. Colleagues congratulated her. I sat frozen in my chair, watching my career disappear into someone else's success story. But I noticed something important. The prototype Elaine displayed on screen wasn't actually working. It was just a polished 3D render, beautiful but lifeless. The real working model was still in my apartment, the only version with functional adaptive technology. That distinction would become crucial. After the meeting, I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to claim credit or push back against Elaine's narrative. When she announced decisions about my design, I nodded. When she presented my work to clients, I smiled from my desk. When she scheduled press interviews without mentioning me, I said nothing. People began treating me differently. I was no longer the talented junior designer with a promising project. I became Elaine's assistant, the person who handled logistics while the real creative work happened elsewhere. My colleagues stopped asking for my input in brainstorming sessions. Invitations to design reviews dried up. I was becoming invisible, and I let it happen, because invisible people are underestimated. Invisible people can work without scrutiny. While Elaine basked in stolen glory, I quietly gathered more evidence. I found old project files on the company server showing similar patterns. 3 years ago, an intern named Wesley had designed a revolutionary ergonomic keyboard. 6 months later, Elaine had presented it as her own work at a tech conference. The intern had left the company shortly after. When I tracked him down through professional networks and called him, his first words were, "She did it to you too, didn't she?" His confirmation gave me something more valuable than anger. It gave me proof of a pattern. In late March, Elaine called me into her office with unusual excitement in her voice. "I have incredible news," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "I've submitted Luma for the National Design Innovators Award. It's one of the most prestigious recognitions in our field. If we win, it could transform the company's reputation." She'd said, as if we'd built this together, as if my name appeared anywhere in her submission. I smiled carefully. "That's wonderful, Elaine. When will we know?" "The ceremony is in 2 months. They announce finalists next week, but I have a good feeling about this." She leaned forward, her expression shifting to something that might have looked like concern to someone who didn't know better. "Maya, I know you've seemed upset lately, but this is bigger than individual credit. This is about what's best for the company, for the team. You understand that, right?" I understood perfectly. I understood that she'd stolen my work and now wanted me to stay quiet while she accepted awards for it. I also understood that she'd just given me a timeline. 2 months until the ceremony. 2 months to prepare my response. Of course, I said, I'm really proud of what we've accomplished. The lie tasted bitter, but it bought me time. As I left her office, I was already planning my next move. That evening, I drafted a detailed documentation packet. It included time-stamped design files showing the evolution of Luma from initial concept to final prototype. Email threads proving I'd originated every major innovation. Photographs of my hand-drawn sketches with visible dates. Testimonials from colleagues who'd seen me working on the project. Code repositories showing I'd written all the adaptive lighting algorithms. I organized everything chronologically, creating an undeniable narrative of creation. Then I did something risky. I contacted the National Design Innovators Award Committee directly. I didn't accuse anyone or make dramatic claims. I simply submitted my documentation as supplementary technical information, explaining that I'd been the primary developer on the project and wanted to ensure the committee had access to complete files for their evaluation. The submission form had a confidentiality option. I checked it, requesting that my information be reviewed privately. Within a week, I received a response. A committee administrator named Patricia Hoffman had reviewed my materials and wanted to schedule a call. When we spoke, her voice was professional, but I could hear the concern underneath. Ms. Thompson, your documentation raises some questions about the attribution in Ms. Porter's submission. Would you be able to demonstrate the working prototype if needed? My heart pounded. Yes, I have the only functional model. There was a long pause. I see. That's very interesting. Let me discuss this with the review board. We may be in touch. The weeks before the ceremony crawled by with agonizing slowness. Elaine was told Luma had made the finalist list, and her excitement became unbearable. She scheduled photo shoots, prepared media talking points, rehearsed her acceptance speech in conference rooms. She bought an expensive white gown for the ceremony and showed everyone pictures. Meanwhile, I bought a simple black dress from a department store sale rack and kept working. I refined the prototype, fixing minor bugs and improving the responsiveness. I printed fresh copies of my documentation. I backed up everything to 3 separate cloud services. When Elaine asked me to help her practice her speech, I sat and listened as she described her creative process, her innovative thinking, her dedication to excellence. Every word was about her singular genius. My name never appeared in her prepared remarks. One afternoon, she paused her rehearsal and looked at me. Maya, I want you at the ceremony, sitting in the audience. It'll be good for you to see how these events work, for future reference. The condescension in her voice was so thick I almost laughed. Of course, I replied. I wouldn't miss it. She had no idea how true that was. No idea that I'd been corresponding with the awards committee. No idea that they'd asked me to bring my prototype. No idea that her moment of triumph was about to become something very different. The night before the ceremony, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, running through every possible scenario. What if the committee changed their mind? What if Elaine somehow convinced them her version was true? What if I walked onto that stage and humiliated myself in front of the entire industry? But then I thought about Wesley, the intern whose career had been derailed by Elaine's theft. I thought about how many other talented people might have been erased by someone in power who knew how to manipulate the system. I thought about every hour I'd spent creating Luma, every problem I'd solved, every iteration I'd refined. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the principle that work should belong to the person who actually did it. Around 3 a.m, I got up and made coffee. I opened my laptop and reviewed my documentation one final time, checking every timestamp and file name. Everything was in order. Everything was true. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would face it knowing I'd told the truth and let the evidence speak for itself. I packed the prototype carefully in a protective case, wrapping it in foam to prevent any damage during transport. Then I finally managed a few hours of restless sleep, dreaming of lights and stages and voices that weren't my own. The National Design Innovators Award ceremony was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a massive building downtown with crystal chandeliers and marble floors. I arrived early, my prototype case heavy in my hands. Security checked my invitation and directed me to a side entrance where Patricia Hoffman was waiting. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. Ms. Thompson, thank you for coming. We've reviewed your materials extensively. The evidence you provided is compelling." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We've decided to present the award to Ms. Porter as originally planned. However, immediately after her acceptance speech, we'll announce that questions have been raised about the project's attribution. At that point, we'll invite you to demonstrate your prototype. This will happen in front of everyone, including the media. Are you prepared for that?" My mouth went dry, but I nodded. "I'm prepared." "Good. We believe in recognizing true innovation. If your prototype functions as you've described and hers doesn't, the truth will be self-evident." She handed me a backstage pass. "Wait here until you're called. And Ms. Thompson, yes, don't be nervous. Truth has a way of making itself clear." I found a quiet corner backstage and sat with my prototype case on my lap, listening to the sounds of the gathering crowd. Through the curtains, I could see the massive stage, the lights, the rows of seats filled with industry leaders, journalists, and designers. Somewhere in that crowd, Elaine was preparing to accept an award for my work, but not for much longer. The ceremony began with opening remarks from the committee chair, followed by several smaller award presentations. I watched on a backstage monitor, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then came the moment I'd been simultaneously dreading and anticipating. The presenter announced the innovation in product design category. The screen behind the stage filled with images of Luma, my sketches transformed into marketing materials, my concept rendered in glossy promotional photos. And the award goes to Elaine Porter for the revolutionary Luma adaptive lighting system. The crowd erupted in applause. I watched Elaine rise from her seat in the audience, her white gown flowing as she made her way to the stage. She climbed the stairs with practiced grace, accepted the trophy with both hands, and turned to face the audience with a brilliant smile. Cameras flashed. People stood. The applause seemed to go on forever. Then she began speaking, and I heard my own words coming from her mouth. Innovation requires dedication. It means countless late nights and the courage to pursue ideas others might dismiss. This design represents months of passionate work, of refusing to accept. Good enough when excellence was possible. Every phrase was something I'd written, something I'd felt. She was performing my speech, my emotions, my story, and the audience was buying every word. My hands clenched into fists. Soon, I whispered to myself, very soon. Elaine finished her speech with a gracious thank you. The crowd applauded again, and she posed for photos with the trophy. My design glowed on the screens behind her, and for a moment, I felt the full weight of how thoroughly she'd stolen this from me. But then the committee chair stepped back to the microphone. If I could have everyone's attention for just one more moment. The applause died down, confusion rippling through the audience. This year, our committee received some additional technical documentation regarding the Luma project. In the interest of transparency and celebrating true innovation, we'd like to invite Maya Thompson, who was listed in our submissions as the project's development designer, to demonstrate the working prototype. The crowd murmured. Cameras swiveled, searching for me. Elaine's smile froze on her face. I watched her on the monitor as she leaned toward the committee chair, whispering something urgently. But Patricia Hoffman was already gesturing toward the wings where I waited. "Ms. Thompson, would you please join us?" I picked up my case, took a deep breath, and walked onto that stage. The lights were blinding after the darkness backstage. The audience was a sea of faces, some curious, some confused, some already suspicious. Elaine stood 5 feet away from me, still clutching her trophy. Her eyes met mine, and I saw panic flash across her features before she covered it with a tight smile. "This should be interesting," she said quietly, her voice not quite reaching the microphone. "It will be," I replied. Patricia handed me a microphone and nodded encouragingly. I set my case down and opened it carefully, removing the actual Luma prototype. Unlike the polished display model in the promotional photos, this one showed signs of real use. Slight scuffs on the base, fingerprints on the adjustment panel, the small imperfections that come from hundreds of hours of testing and refinement. I cleared my throat and began speaking, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Luma was designed to address a specific problem. Traditional desk lighting doesn't adapt to how we actually work. We shift positions, we lean forward and back, we change our environment throughout the day. I created Luma to respond to those changes automatically. I demonstrated as I spoke, positioning the lamp on a small table the stage crew had brought out. When I turned it on, the light glowed softly, a warm white that seemed almost alive. Then I stepped back, and the lamp's sensors tracked my movement. As I shifted my posture, the light intensity and angle adjusted smoothly, following my position. When I moved to the side, the lamp rotated slightly to maintain optimal illumination. The audience gasped. I heard whispers rippling through the crowd. Beside me, Elaine's display model sat dark and lifeless, just an expensive piece of plastic and metal. The difference was obvious. Mine worked. Hers didn't. The committee chair turned to Elaine. "Ms. Porter, would you like to demonstrate your version?" Elaine's face had gone pale. She looked at her non-functional prop, then at me, then at the audience full of cameras and witnesses. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Elaine finally found her voice, and it came out too loud, too bright, with an edge of panic underneath. "Of course. Maya has been instrumental in helping me test various models. This is obviously one of the alternate prototypes we developed during the refinement process." She laughed, but it sounded hollow in the silent room. "The development process involves creating multiple versions. This is completely normal." Patricia stepped forward, her expression neutral. "Ms. Porter, according to the documentation we received, this is the only functional prototype. Your submission to our committee included renderings and specifications, but no working model. Could you explain that discrepancy?" "The entire project is in ongoing development," Elaine said, speaking faster now. "We have multiple versions at different stages. This particular model represents just one phase of the design evolution." Her explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, the kind of thing someone might say if questioned about any complex project. But I could see the audience beginning to doubt. The way she wouldn't make eye contact with anyone, the way her hands gripped the trophy like it might escape, the way she kept glancing at me with barely concealed desperation. I stayed quiet, letting her words hang in the air. Patricia turned to me. "Ms. Thompson, you submitted quite extensive documentation to our committee. Would you like to share anything about the project's development history?" I pulled out my tablet, already loaded with the timeline I'd prepared. On the projection screen behind me, images appeared. My original sketches with dates visible. Email timestamps showing when I'd first proposed the concept. Design files with creation dates and modification logs. Code repositories showing my authorship of the adaptive algorithms. The evidence spoke louder than any accusation I could have made. The screen showed my handwriting on preliminary sketches dated 8 months ago. Email threads where I discussed technical challenges with the engineering team. CAD files with metadata proving I'd created every component. The audience watched in growing silence as the timeline unfolded. Then, unexpectedly, someone stood up in the crowd. I recognized Olivia from the engineering department at my company. She'd helped me with some of the sensor calibrations. "I worked with Maya on this project," Olivia said, her voice carrying in the quiet room. "I watched her build that prototype from scratch. She spent months in the lab, testing different sensors, refining the algorithms. I saw her there almost every night." Another voice joined in, this time from someone I didn't immediately recognize. A man in the audience stood. "I'm Wesley Hayes. I worked at Innovate Tech 3 years ago. Elaine Porter took credit for an ergonomic keyboard I designed." When I tried to speak up, I was pushed out of the company. He looked directly at Elaine. "This is her pattern. She finds talented junior designers and steals their work." The room erupted in whispers. Cameras swiveled between Elaine and the audience members who were now standing. More people began pulling out phones, recording what was happening. This was no longer just an awards ceremony. It was becoming something else entirely. Elaine's face had gone from pale to flushed. She took a step toward the microphone, but Patricia smoothly intercepted her. "Ms. Porter, in light of these revelations, the committee needs to review the attribution of this project more thoroughly." I watched as Elaine's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Her voice rose, sharp with desperation. "This is absurd. Maya worked under my supervision. Of course her name is on technical documents. That's how hierarchical projects function. She's a junior designer who contributed technical support to my creative vision." But Patricia was already shaking her head. "Ms. Porter, we've reviewed hundreds of pages of documentation. The timestamps show Ms. Thompson originated every major innovation in this design. The code was written entirely by her. The initial concepts, the refinements, the problem-solving, all of it traces back to her work. You submitted this project as your own creation, but the evidence suggests otherwise." Elaine opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She looked around the stage like she was searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. The cameras were still recording. The audience was still watching. Her public relations representative appeared from the wings, whispering urgently in her ear. I could see the moment she realized there was no talking her way out of this. The carefully maintained image of an innovative leader was disintegrating in real time, under bright lights, in front of everyone who mattered in our industry. The committee chair stepped forward. After reviewing the evidence presented today, we are retracting the award from Ms. Porter pending a full investigation into the project's true authorship. The glass trophy was gently but firmly removed from Elaine's hands. She stood there empty-handed, her white gown suddenly looking like a costume she'd worn to play a part she'd never actually earned. Elaine left the stage quickly, her PR representative creating a path through the crowd. I saw her face as she passed, mascara beginning to streak, her expression somewhere between rage and devastation. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. The ceremony had descended into controlled chaos. Reporters were pushing forward, shouting questions. Committee members were huddled in urgent conversation. Patricia took the microphone and tried to restore order. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be conducting a thorough review of this matter. In the interest of recognizing true innovation and maintaining the integrity of these awards, we are pausing this portion of the ceremony. Ms. Thompson, if you could please remain available for follow-up questions. I nodded, carefully packing my prototype back into its case. My hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off, but I kept my expression calm. Several colleagues from Innovate Tech surrounded me, offering support and asking questions. Olivia hugged me. You should have told us what was happening. We would have backed you up from the start. I didn't know who to trust, I admitted. And I needed proof, not just accusations. Smart, she said. Wesley Hayes appeared through the crowd. He extended his hand and I shook it. Thank you for having the courage I didn't have. This might finally stop her from doing it to anyone else. I hope so, I said. The weight of what had just happened was beginning to settle on my shoulders. I just publicly accused my boss of theft in front of the entire industry. Whatever happened next, my life at Innovate Tech would never be the same. The aftermath moved quickly. By the next morning, tech industry news sites were running stories about the ceremony disruption. Social media exploded with discussions about workplace credit theft and junior designers being exploited. Several other people came forward with stories about Elaine, creating a pattern too obvious to ignore. Innovate Tech's CEO called an emergency meeting. I was summoned to the executive floor, along with representatives from HR and legal. I sat in a conference room I'd never been invited to before, facing Harrison Brooks and 3 people in expensive suits. Ms. Thompson, Harrison began, we've spent the night reviewing your documentation and interviewing staff. It's clear that serious attribution errors occurred with the Luma project. I waited, saying nothing. He continued, his expression uncomfortable. We're launching a formal internal review of all projects Ms. Porter has overseen. In the meantime, she's been placed on administrative leave. We'd like to offer you the position of lead designer on the Luma project, with full credit and appropriate compensation. The words should have felt like victory, but mostly I felt tired. What about the other projects she took credit for? Wesley's keyboard, and probably others we don't know about yet. The HR director spoke up. We're reviewing everything. Any employees who feel they've been improperly credited will have the opportunity to present evidence. Changes will be made where appropriate. I looked at them all, these executives who'd enabled Elaine for years by not asking questions. And if I hadn't had proof, if I'd just been another junior designer complaining about credit theft, the room fell silent. Harrison at least had the decency to look ashamed. You're right. We failed to catch this pattern. That's on us. I accepted the position of lead designer, but I made it clear this wasn't just about me. I want a formal policy requiring proper attribution on all projects. I want junior designers to have a way to report credit theft without fear of retaliation. And I want those policies enforced. They agreed to everything. Elaine resigned 3 days later, before the investigation could be completed. Her carefully worded statement talked about pursuing new opportunities and thanked the company for her time there. She didn't apologize or acknowledge what she'd done. 2 weeks after her departure, I was officially named lead designer of the Luma product line. My first action was to go through every document and file, adding proper credits to everyone who'd actually worked on the project. Olivia got recognition for her engineering contributions. The manufacturing team got credited for their problem-solving. Even the intern who'd helped with early testing got his name in the documentation. When the new Luma marketing materials were produced, my name was prominently displayed. Not as assistant or contributor, but as creator and lead designer. The first time I saw my name on the packaging, I had to sit down. This was real. This was mine. The product launched 2 months later with strong sales and positive reviews. Tech journalists praised the innovation and specifically called out my design work. Several mentioned the awards ceremony incident, noting that real talent had won out over corporate politics. My career, which had nearly been stolen before it began, was suddenly thriving. But more important than the success was the principle. Credit mattered. Attribution mattered. The work belonged to the person who actually did it. 6 months after the ceremony, the National Design Innovators Award Committee reached out again. After completing their review, they determined the Luma project deserved recognition under proper attribution. They invited me to the next year's ceremony to receive the award officially. This time, I walked onto that stage as the announced recipient. No drama, no revelations, just the recognition I'd earned. I kept my speech short. Innovation requires not just creativity and technical skill, but integrity. It means giving credit where it's due, acknowledging the contributions of everyone involved, and understanding that real success isn't built on lies. I talked about the junior designers who work late nights perfecting ideas that might never see their names in public, about the importance of documentation and protecting your work, about the courage it takes to speak truth to power when you're at the bottom of the hierarchy. When I finished, the applause felt different than it had when I'd watched Elaine accept this same award. It felt earned. After the ceremony, several young designers approached me with their own stories of credit theft and exploitation. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to know they weren't alone. I listened to each of them, and when I could, I offered practical guidance. Document everything. Keep time-stamped records. Build relationships with witnesses. Don't rely on confrontation alone. Evidence speaks louder than accusations. Watching Elaine's career unravel had been satisfying, but this was more meaningful. This was about changing the culture that had allowed her behavior to continue for years. Meanwhile, I heard through industry connections that Elaine had struggled to find new employment. The ceremony incident had been too public, too documented. Companies were reluctant to hire someone with proven ethical problems, especially in a field where reputation matters so much. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction at that news, but mostly I felt nothing. Her downfall wasn't my focus anymore. Building something positive from what had happened was. I used my growing platform to advocate for better protections for junior designers. I spoke at conferences about workplace credit theft. I consulted with companies on creating better attribution policies. The incident that could have destroyed my career instead became the foundation for something larger than myself. At Innovate Tech, the cultural shift was gradual but real. Junior staff began speaking up more in meetings. Managers started being more careful about attribution. The policy changes we'd implemented gave people a framework for protecting their work. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Sometimes I thought about Elaine, wondered what she was doing, whether she understood what she'd done wrong or just resented getting caught. I'd heard she'd moved to another city and was working in a different field. I hoped she'd learned something, but I didn't need her remorse to feel vindicated. My success was its own validation. The best revenge wasn't her downfall. It was my thriving career, the innovations I continued to create, the designers I helped protect from similar exploitation. It was proving that truth and hard work could win, even against someone with more power and experience. A year after everything happened, I gave a talk at my old design school. The students sat in rows, eager and nervous, probably imagining their future careers with a mix of excitement and anxiety. I talked about my journey, not sugarcoating the difficult parts. I told them about the months of having my work stolen, about the humiliation of watching someone else take credit, about the fear that I'd never get recognition for what I'd created. But I also told them about the importance of documentation, the power of evidence, the value of patience and strategy over immediate confrontation. Your work is yours, I said. Guard it, document it, protect it. But also remember that success built on theft always collapses eventually. Truth has a way of revealing itself if you're smart enough to preserve the evidence and brave enough to present it when the moment comes. During the question period, a student asked, "Do you regret how everything happened? Do you wish you'd spoken up sooner?" I considered the question carefully. No, if I'd confronted Elaine earlier without proof, it would have been her word against mine. She had authority, experience, and credibility. I had none of those things, but I had the truth and I had evidence. Sometimes the quietest revenge is the most effective. Let them think they've won, then show the receipts. Students laughed at that, but I saw several taking notes. After the talk, a young woman approached me hesitantly. "My supervisor has been taking credit for my designs. I don't know what to do." I spent 20 minutes with her explaining the documentation process, the importance of time-stamped files, and the value of witnesses. By the time we finished talking, she looked less defeated and more determined. That conversation reminded me why all of this mattered. It wasn't just about me and Elaine. It was about every talented person who'd been erased by someone more powerful. These days, I keep the award on a shelf in my apartment, right next to the original Luma prototype. The lamp still works perfectly, its light warm and responsive, following me as I move through the room. Sometimes late at night, when I'm working on new designs, I look at them both. The trophy represents vindication, the recognition I'd earned and nearly lost. The lamp represents something more important. It represents the hours of work, the problem-solving, the creativity that no one could steal because it existed in my mind and my skills, not just in files that could be renamed. Elaine had stolen credit, but she'd never possessed the actual knowledge that made Luma work. The code, the engineering principles, the intuition about how light and ergonomics and human behavior intersected. That was mine, and no amount of corporate manipulation could change that. I still work at Innovate Tech, now as a senior designer with my own team. When I hire junior designers, I make sure they know their ideas are protected. I document contributions carefully. I give credit publicly and often. I remember what it felt like to be erased, and I refuse to do that to anyone else. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't built that evidence fortress, if I'd trusted that my work would speak for itself without documentation. The answer is clear. I would have been forgotten, another talented person crushed under someone else's ambition. But I'd learned early that in corporate environments, especially for women, especially for young people trying to build careers, you need more than talent. You need proof. No rage, no dramatic confrontation, just systematic documentation and the patience to wait for the right moment. My story isn't about revenge. It's about the quiet power of evidence, the importance of protecting your work, and the truth that eventually, with enough preparation, light always exposes lies. Elaine's name has faded from industry conversations. Mine continues to appear on designs, patents, award citations. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't fire. It's proof, persistence, and letting your work speak louder than anyone else's theft ever could. The light follows me as I work, steady and true, exactly as I designed it to be.